You are not broken. You are not weak. You experience this apparent compulsion. Greater than you, this dominant yearning. You have this void that demands bringing this back is not insane. Failure is not a moral failing. Rather, it is every form of suffering has a source. Carl Jung, among the finest explorers, was Carl Jung, of the human spirit, claimed that a lot of vices are not only bad behaviors, but frantic searches for something revered in one of his best-known correspondences addressed to Alcoholics founder. He was open about his addiction, which is the spiritual desire that is frustrated as the soul yearning for purpose and attempting to reach out to the infinite and discover only alcohol, drugs, excess, and anarchy. This spiritus contraperitum is what Jung named it. The genuine spirit fighting the fake gab mate's spirit on the opposite side, physician and psychiatrist, who committed to his life to comprehend the origin of according to human suffering. The question is not why addiction, but why the suffering. According to him, the issue is not addiction, but has someone found a way to deal with having an underlying trauma that persists, yet if you pause to consider honestly, you might discover your own story. That's what motivates you to repeat, too. The same actions to undermine yourself. To flee from oneself isn't the fix. Anesthesia is pleasure. This movie does not serve as a lesson or a judgment, it's a mirror. Here, we'll examine together what you might have been staying away for a while. We'll discuss what goes on behind addiction, whether to alcohol or drug shopping, eating, sex, or even continuous diversion, since, in reality, all of this is merely an effort to fill the identical vapor Buddhism describes the world of ghosts, with little lips that are ravenous, having huge bellies that are starving for something that never shows up. But he employs this metaphor to explain the junkie, who has a voracious appetite, hunger for presence, and connection for belonging, but being unsure of where to discover it, and look for solace in whatever feasible, notwithstanding the cost of such assistance, everything. Maybe you're exhausted. You want to know if there's a way out. I'm not here to guarantee you a simple solution. However, I can assure you that there is a road, and it starts once you comprehend that addiction is a sign, not the cause of pain from an illness is not the end. It is a phoning, and if you're brave enough if you pay attention, you might find that there, on the other side, another life is waiting. Let's leave together immediately, since knowing addiction is knowing you, and this can alter comprehending. Addiction doesn't start with the material. It starts with discomfort. Prior to the initial dose is the first to escape. Obsessive conduct. A body was in a neglected heart was in pain. A fearful, bewildered, and lonely child was present, who discovered much too soon that the world was not a secure location. Canadian-Hungarian Gabor Mate, a doctor, spent decades residing with individuals from around the world, would rather forget those who are destitute. Patients with persistent drug usage who were abandoned by the medical system as well as their own families. And this is what he found. Every single one of them carried a severe emotional scars from maltreatment, abandoned, disregarded, assaulted, or just devoid of affection. And even those that did not suffer from serious traumas in the experiences in the traditional sense were still lived, having emotional detachment enough to mold their minds to be unhappy. According to Mate, addiction is to make an effort to ease that discomfort. According to him, the true question is never why addiction, but instead of the suffering, and that inquiry alters everything, because once you realize this, you cease to see addictive behavior as weakness or whimsy, as a foolish decision, and you begin to see it as a valid, albeit damaging, the addicted person's reaction to real suffering. Brain is a brain, not a poor one, that is capable of self-defense when you use drugs or immerse yourself in obsessive actions that your body lets out. Dopamine is a reward-related neurotransmitter. The same concept applies to pleasure survival, triggered when we experience acceptance and affection relationship. But for a lot of those experiences were either painful or non-existent, so it teaches the brain to look for the same kind of relief. Pornography of alcohol and cocaine, somewhere obsessed with food purchasing on social media, status of gaming mate, characterizes addicts as residents of Puss, and picture of the realm of hungry ghosts, inspired by Buddhism. According to this symbolic perspective, these animals possess short necks, tiny mouths, and huge bellies rumbling with hunger. It is the ideal thing that they can never comprehend. Picture of the addicted person constantly devouring in search of, but never filled, because the desired outcome is actually not. The material is the sensation of being in its entirety. It is an attempt to anesthetize the inner child's silent wail that was never heard. And you might even see yourself in this. Maybe you're not compelled to something that blatantly ruins your. Maybe it's something more subtle in life, more covert and socially acceptable. However, the query remains, what are you attempting to? Suppress your emotions. If the world keeps punishing the action and the suffering that motivates, it keeps becoming silent and invisible. That is the reason why therapies based only on abstinence is so frequently unsuccessful, because they ignore that cause and fight the symptom. And while the incision remains open, the mind will keep looking for relief, regardless of the price. But what if you are looking for the material therein? In reality, the escape in excess is within you. What if genuine alleviation is not obtained from anesthesia, but from being back in touch with this is where Carl Jung's soul is? Enters for him, addiction is not merely an effort to avoid suffering. It's a misplaced quest for the sacred. In the following section, we shall delve into Jung's insightful perspective on addiction as a spiritual crisis and comprehend the reasons behind his felt that the real remedy for re-establishing a connection with the self. If this information makes sense to you, sign up. You press the subscribe button, and thank you for subscribing to the channel. Addiction. What is it? Your assistant Carl Jung believed that addiction was never only a behavioral disorder, let alone a problem. He perceived it as a profound lack of willpower, a sign of spiritual confusion, an appeal from the soul seeking purpose, urgent effort to get back in touch with the using tools. The self is the psychic totality that ultimately only intensify the internal schism. Jung recognized that people cannot stand to be separated from their own facility, and when that trauma or other factors can break a connection, suppression, loss, or social conditioning of identity, the mind looks for a means to make up for this reimbursement. In the event that it fails to locate manifestations of symbolic or healthful pathways through destructive obsessions, addictions, and compulsive behaviors, it seems as though the person, after losing beginning to make contact with their inner axis, look for alternatives to the sacred and numerous discover this in drugs, alcohol, or any actions that result in a change of awareness. When writing, Jung came to this realization. To Alcoholics co-founder Bill Wilson, unidentified, in this landmark letter, Jung clarifies that many people's craving for alcohol is actually the subconscious yearning for a mystical encounter, for a broader transcendental state of awareness. Contra-Puritan spirit is the genuine spirit in contrast to the fake spirit material. As a mimic of this statement, the divine is audacious. But consider carefully what addiction is. Provide at least a fleeting sense of relaxation, tranquility, bliss, or escape thee. The issue is not what the addict is looking for. Where they are looking, Jung is the issue. Felt that the motivation behind all compulsions, there is a valid soul impulse, that urge to go back to the center in order to get back in touch with oneself. Yet when this impulse is not conscious expression as a result of suppression, fear is an escape from trauma or conditioning. Through the fissures and appears as destructive behavior is not acknowledged. Spirituality that comes back through the shadow, which explains why Jung is true. Recuperation cannot be obtained only from abstention or justification. It needs to include the trip back to the self-construction of a life that is symbolic, combining opposites. Because in their heart, addicts are people who have lost the link that connected them to their own soul and seeks to bring that back. Connection in the soul method. They are aware of looking beyond what already exists and has always been within. However, there is a significant barrier to this. Explore a hidden adversary that resides inside everyone, and which is frequently the most accountable for forcing us into addiction, is the shadow of what we try to forget and suppress. Your denial. The following section will examine how the reasons why addictions are fueled by shadows should confront directly. If we genuinely wish to, we must liberate ourselves. The shadow. There is an uncharted area inside of you. Location, composed with everything you own been compelled to conceal, suppress, deny, or this location, in Jungian psychology, should be forgotten, is known as the shadow, and it is exactly this unlived portion, this suppressed content of the mind that mostly drives the shadow's addictive behaviors, made up of everything that at some point time in your life that you discovered shouldn't be. Sadness, rage, shame, fear, and more sensitivity, strength, sexuality, and aspirations. Anything that was rejected or accepted, whether by family customs or religion, was ingrained in people's minds. But the reality of something being suppressed does not imply that it stops existing completely. The reverse of what is exiled from awareness starts to take action in the shadows, affecting feelings and thoughts and actions in a compulsive, indirect manner and frequently destructive way. Jung claimed that you are not cognizant of appears as fate in your life. In this situation, addiction is not an act of free will. It is a sign of a fractured brain. The shadow is inquiring. It is the ingested rage for passage. It becomes an internal explosion. The unresolved pain that becomes, it is the suffocating compulsion. Weakness that passes for anesthesia. Take a moment to consider how many times have you continued the actions you vowed to. How many times have you abandoned, sabotaged yourself while being aware of it? Logically, that it would hurt you. In what way? Have you ever felt possessed by someone a lot? force that appeared to be stronger than you is not a lack of self-control, but rather unconscious material attempting to surface, and the harder you try to suppress it, the it gets stronger. Addiction develops as a means of controlling the explosion, a valve for pressure. Everything that consciousness doesn't desire or are unable to confront, and this is the trap. As long as addiction is treated as you will only be engaged in combat. With this symptom, the underlying cause is located deeper, and the thing you don't want to see is and you're afraid to touch the shadow. But it is there that the healing occurs. A deep healing journey necessitates bravery to go down and cross the deepest recesses of the mind, to identify what was concealed. It hurts, it's uncomfortable. However, it's also freeing, since when you incorporate the shadow, it stops regulate you. It becomes a component of your authority, and becoming free of your tormentor trauma is the domain of the shadow. Unsolved recollections of childhood. It influenced your feelings and circuits in the nervous system. We shall delve even farther in the following section. We'll comprehend how early life traumas and disconnection-related experiences produce an environment that is conducive to addiction root, and the reasons for a person's life, even though they haven't forgotten, yet permeates each decision the person makes. Creates the injury prior to addiction. There was desertion prior to obsessive conduct. There existed absence prior to substance usage. There was discomfort that was unsure of how to name itself. But in the quiet, they screamed of the body, and we must do that. Begin at the wound's opening, because addiction is not innate. Addiction is a creative adaptation, psychological reaction to an intolerable gabber. Mate's realism is sharp in claiming that the antithesis of addiction is not connection, is the key to sobriety. And this assertion has a disturbing reality that most addicts people aren't looking for pleasure, but alleviation of long-term loneliness from sentiments of inferiority, from the suffering from not feeling seen or loved or belonging. And this suffering seldom starts it is born in childhood and grows into adulthood in the early lives, frequently even before we can discuss it. Research indicates that the early developmental years significantly develop a child's nervous system. The system arranges itself according to the emotional encounters it has. If it flourishes in an environment of love, acceptance, and emotional presence, as its brain grows circuits of regulation, safety, and trust. However, if it develops in a setting of abuse, neglect, instability, or emotional, those identical circuits grow chilly. Dysfunctional, the youngster discovers the world is unsafe, and it gets worse. That its suffering won't be addressed, but trauma is not just a result of significant occurrences. It is not necessary to have endured hardship, physical assault, or overt mistreatment to experience trauma. The definition of trauma is the subjective sense of powerlessness when the emotional system is overtaken by something it is unable to procedure, which stays frozen in the body, which is the source of addiction. In an effort to control what is never subject to regulations, consider addiction to be an emotional prosthesis when containment is present, was deficient in areas without nurturing. It provides listening when none was available. What the child inside of you asked for and did not obtain comfort, relief, or control the substance's use for a while. Compulsive behavior settles the neurological system. It introduces a fictitious feeling of calm, power, and belonging. Yet it is a tenuous respite that arrives at rising costs. For the body of the addict's memory retains memories that frequently forgets. Recollections of ongoing emotional stress, desertion, because one does not feel worthy of love, which is why profound healing. The body cannot be disregarded since it is in the traumatized body, is located in the body that pulses from the wound, and it is healing needs to take place throughout the body. Consequently, addiction is less of a sickness and more of a last-ditch effort to self-control, at surviving and managing a pain that nobody noticed. And when you really get it, this is a change. Shame and compassion replace guilt. Starts to dissolve gradually, but one crucial component remains. Absence of conflict, because being aware of the source of addiction is essential. It's not enough to cross this area in order to descend to the source of the discomfort. According to Jung, no tree ever reaches the sky without its roots ever coming into contact with hell, and we will discuss precisely that. Regarding the courage in the following section, descending to make contact with one's own darkness and to turn suffering into a gateway to change in what you're listening to connects with you, you'll discover genuine value in Beyond the Shadow. My ebook dissects Jung's main points and provides you have the tools to better understand yourself. In the pinned comment, there is a deep link. A deadly delusion exists pertaining to the notion of recuperation, of fantasies promoted by self-help catchphrases and hurried speeches that could conquer addiction just by willpower, constructive thoughts, or a habit shift. But the reality has changed, and the actual healing process is not painful. It is a downhill rather than an ascent. Carl Jung clarified this in one of "No tree grows" is one of his most potent quotes. To the heavens without making contact with its roots. The addict's hell, and this hell, the journey is real and not only symbolic. Tangible sensation in the body. It is the enter one's own unconscious mind. It is the reunion with all of the things that have hidden aside, denied and forgotten. But the healing that has never stopped starts when the person stops running away. As soon as they initially agree to consider the suffering rather than putting it to sleep, once they comprehend that hunger that never is satisfied, nothing will be able to fill that emptiness. Vanish with another dosage of click once more to buy something else. Diversion, it will only cease to hurt. When it's heard, descending is more important than an act of bravery entails confronting the shadow, directly identifying one's own maskless ghosts sitting with suffering, shame, remorse, and having to endure the unease of being exposed in front of oneself. It's not nice, it's not fast. Although it might be cruel at times, loneliness is real, and it's essential. This procedure calls for a whole transformation of posture. It's moving away from the "I must use the logic of battle against myself. Overcome addiction, I must overcome my urges," and going into a logic of addiction to reconciliation is not a threat. It is a messenger to be destroyed. An unpleasant and warped guide that indicates precisely where the material is in the wound, or destructive action is the same. It demonstrates the route that must be taken, since it indicates where it bleeds, it aches where it lacks. And this is not merely a psychological adventure. Due to the fact that addiction is at the fundamentally a failure and a crisis of meaning, try to get back in touch with something. The more the junkie is banished from themselves, cut off from the when self-fragmentation occurs within recovery. It is not only about ceasing to use, or it is about the addicted behavior. Putting that wholeness back together, about returning. It's about integrating to live in one's own center. Yet, this returning is only feasible if the discomfort is passed through rather than avoided. And this only occurs silently when facing. That when giving up illusions, one needs death to your former self and be born again. Not as someone who has been healed, but as someone whole, who doesn't have to run away, who can at last be active in their own lives. However, this rebirth does not occur it is constructed gradually all at once, with knowledge and assistance, with presence, which can only occur when the individual is aware that they are not shattered, disengaged, and are hurt, but they're not awful. They are similar to everyone else and are not alone. We were looking for a method to return home in the last. We'll end this segment of the video. Cycle, we'll discuss what it actually is, what it means to be free regarding the realization that occurs when there is a Shaw, suffering is accepted as the concept is surrounded by a perilous illusion. Of healing is a myth promoted by self-help catchphrases and hurried speeches that it is able to fight addiction on its own via determination, optimistic thinking, or change in habit. But the reality is different. The awakening recovering from an addiction is not just about giving up a drug or harmful behavior. It's about